Okay, let's just jump right into this. Imagine it's January 2026. For years, in the middle of all the chaos in northern Syria, a dream was actually taking shape, a homeland for the Kurdish people, built from the ashes of the war against ISIS. And then, just like that, in 72 hours, it was gone. The dream, the state, the alliance, all of it just vanished.
I mean, the speed was just unbelievable. On January 15th, a new Syrian government kicks off its final attack. By the 17th, just 2 days later, Raqqa, which was not only the old ISIS capital, but the huge symbol of Kurdish victory, was totally overrun. And then 1 day later, on the 18th, it was all over. The Kurdish-led forces had to sign a capitulation, and every hope for a state of their own was just extinguished.
So you gotta ask, right? How? How did this fighting force, celebrated all over the world as heroes, America's #1 ally on the ground against ISIS, how did they lose absolutely everything in the blink of an eye? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind and piece together a story of heroism, of constantly shifting alliances, and in the end, a really brutal betrayal.
To really get what was lost here, we first have to understand the main players, and that starts with the Kurds themselves. So who are they, and what have they been fighting for all this time?
First off, the numbers here are just staggering. You're talking about somewhere between 30 and 40 million Kurds. That makes them the largest ethnic group on the entire planet without a country to call home. You see, way back after World War I, they were actually promised a homeland, a Kurdistan. But that promise was broken, and they were left scattered across Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, which, as you can imagine, has created decades of tension.
But then, out of the total chaos of the Syrian civil war, the Syrian Kurds managed to build something pretty incredible. They carved out this huge, self-governing region across northern Syria that they called Rojava. I mean, for all practical purposes, it was their state in the making.
Okay, and this part is absolutely crucial for understanding the politics of all of this. It's a tale of two groups. In Turkey, you've got the PKK, which is this Marxist group that's been fighting an insurgency for decades. Turkey, the US, and the EU all call them a terrorist organization. Then, over in Syria, you have the YPG. This is the military force that the US partnered with to destroy ISIS. Now, here's the key. For Turkey, there's no difference between them. They see the YPG as basically the same thing as the PKK and a direct threat to their own country. So how did this Syrian Kurdish group, the YPG, become so incredibly important on the world stage? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. They happen to share a common enemy with the most powerful military in the world. And the setup they had, it was a brutally effective division of labor. You had the US and its coalition partners controlling the skies, bringing down just devastating air support. And on the ground, the YPG were basically the only capable, reliable force willing to fight and die to take back territory from the Islamic State.
And man, were they successful. They became these international heroes for their incredible defense of the city of Kobani. Then in 2017, they hit their biggest milestone, liberating the infamous ISIS capital of Raqqa. And by 2019, they were the ones who declared the final territorial defeat of the caliphate. They really paid for it in blood, too, with thousands of their fighters killed in the process.
And it also really helped that the image they projected was perfectly in line with Western values. They pushed for a decentralized, democratic state. They championed gender equality. Their all-female fighting units became totally iconic. And they were smart. They allied with local Arab groups to create the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, which showed they could play well with others. But, as is so often the case, just as the Kurds were finally solidifying their gains, the political ground in Syria started to shift right under their feet. When the Assad regime fell in late 2024, it created the perfect storm. So meet Syria's new president, Ahmed Al-Sharaa. Now, get this. This is a man who, from 2012 to 2017, was the leader of the Al-Nusra Front. Yeah, the official Syrian branch of al-Qaeda. After taking power, he swapped his military fatigues for a business suit and started painting himself as a modernizer, a unifier. But his past, well, that wasn't something people were going to forget, especially not Syria's minorities. Now, here's where things get really dangerous for the Kurds. Al-Sharaa only came to power because he had critical military support from Turkey. And it didn't take long for him and Turkish President Erdogan to realize they shared one huge goal: the complete and total destruction of Kurdish autonomy in Syria. For Erdogan, it was about getting rid of a security threat on his border. For Al-Sharaa, it was about unifying Syria under his absolute control. But hang on a second.
There was one big thing that should have stopped this whole alliance dead in its tracks. The Kurds had a powerful protector, right? The United States. There were American troops right there, on the ground in Kurdish territory, acting as a shield. So, what happened to that shield? This quote from a U.S. official, man, it just cuts right to the cold, hard truth of the matter. The partnership was never meant to last forever. From Washington's point of view, the YPG were a tool used to solve a very specific problem, ISIS. And once that problem was considered solved, well, the tool just wasn't needed anymore. So basically, the U.S. made a cold, strategic calculation. The new top priority was a stable, unified Syria, and Al-Sharaa seemed like the only guy who could deliver that. This move also had the big benefit of making Turkey happy, and Turkey is a much more important long-term ally as a member of NATO. The Trump administration, seeing the whole Kurdish issue as an internal Syrian problem, pulled back those American forces that had been keeping Turkey and others at bay. Just like that, the shield was gone. And if you need one single image to understand just how bizarre and how fast this whole policy shift was, here it is. The new Syrian president, a former leader of an al-Qaeda affiliate, just casually shooting hoops with American officers on a U.S. military base. It was a completely surreal signal to the entire world, and especially to the Kurds, that the game had fundamentally changed. So what was the immediate fallout from this decision? Well, the consequences of those 72 hours in January are still rippling far, far beyond the borders of Syria. Because here's the thing we often forget. While the YPG were celebrated as heroes, they were also something else. They were jailers. They were guarding tens of thousands of captured ISIS fighters and their families. So when the Kurdish front collapsed, so did the security at all these prisons. In just 1 month, over 1,500 jihadists reportedly escaped from just a single facility. It's a terrifyingly simple domino effect, right? The collapse of the Kurdish-led SDF meant the guards had to abandon their posts. That led to mass prison breaks all over the region, releasing thousands of hardened, experienced terrorists back into the wild. And the result is the very real danger of a resurgent, reconstituted ISIS, which is a brand new threat to the entire world. Which leaves us with this final, really unsettling question. President Al-Sharaa, with Turkey's help and America's blessing, he got his goal of unifying Syria. But in trading an ally for what looked like a stable state, did the West accidentally trade a victory against terror for the seeds of its rebirth? Syria might be whole again, but you have to ask, at what cost to the rest of us?